She kissed him in our kitchen and smiled at me like nothing happened. It wasn't a nervous grin or a flinchy, guilty half-smile. It was calm, almost polite, the kind of smile you give the neighbor when you bump into them at the mailbox. Except the neighbor, Ryan, was right there, leaning on our counter like he owned the place, fingertips spread near the bowl where Ella keeps her hair ties and Jack hides spare quarters for the ice cream truck. My grocery bags hit the tile. An apple rolled under the table. Somewhere, a faucet dripped. And I just stood there, a husband in a quiet museum of the life he thought he had, watching the exhibit take itself apart. We were a suburban cliché in all the good ways. 2 kids, a maple in the front yard, a dog we swore we weren't ready for, and then immediately fell in love with, Saturday Target runs, Costco pizza slices as a treat, little league practice, school pickup lines that wrapped around the block while minivans crawled forward in patient, caffeinated despair. I'm 35. She's 34. We met freshman year when the professor put us together for a debate neither of us had read for. We winged it, won it, and left the room laughing. For years she had a way of poking my side when I zoned out, like she was reminding me that a version of me lived in her head and he owed her his attention. She was warmth. She was, text me when you get there. She was the humming that came through the bathroom door while she showered. She was habit in the most tender sense of the word. And then, God, I wish there was a neat timestamp I could circle. She wasn't. You don't notice distance right away. It's not a slammed door. It's a draft. A missed kiss. A coffee that goes from 2 sugars, light stir, to I'll just grab something later. She said she was tired more often, which made sense. Part-time at the library, full-time with the kids, a house that seemed to throw new chores at us like confetti. But her eyes started doing this thing where they'd skim past me, like a finger missing a page corner. The love you, at the end of a call downshifted into, okay, talk later. She used to look at me the way people look at ocean views. I became a wall. Then came the gym. She had always joked that her cardio was chasing Jack around the yard. Suddenly she had leggings arriving in cheerful pastel packages. A water bottle that clanged like a bell, a program, a schedule, playlists she wouldn't let me hear because they were cringy. I bought into it, told her I was proud of her, made dinner on her gym nights. It was good for her. It was good for us. That's what I told myself. The phone changed clothes with the rest of her. New passcode. Face down on the table. Notifications off. Brought into the bathroom like a talisman. One night, while she was in the shower, I picked it up with the innocence of a man wanting to see a weather app. The lock screen stared back at me the way you look at a stranger who recognizes you and you can't place them. It felt small and invasive and wrong. It also felt like being outside your own house without a key. We had a neighbor, Ryan. Divorced, early 40s, ex-firefighter, yard immaculate in that either you love mowing or you're avoiding something way. He helped us with a leak once and charmed our kids by making a coin appear from behind Jack's ear. I watched the coin trick and tried not to be annoyed that I couldn't figure it out. He had a truck that looked like it wanted to pull other trucks out of ditches. A tattoo he never really explained, and a habit of lingering in our driveway with easy conversation. I told myself loudly that he was fine. The Friday that broke things started ordinary. I left work early because a gut feeling pulled on me. I don't know how else to explain it. You can call it anxiety. You can call it suspicion dressing up as instinct. All I know is I was supposed to be at my desk and instead I was picking up ground beef and blueberries and a carton of eggs, thinking about burgers on the grill and whether the kids would eat the blueberries before I could rinse them. Her car was in the driveway. The kids were at her mother's. The house was too quiet in that museum way I mentioned, the way quiet makes you aware of your own breathing. I walked into the kitchen and there he was, leaning on our counter like the man in a rental listing photo, casual and framed by good light. She stood next to him with that easy laugh I had fallen for. She put her hand on his wrist to say something. He slid his palm to her hip like it had always lived there. Then the kiss. Soft, unhurried. Familiar like an old shortcut you stop noticing you're taking. She opened her eyes, saw me, and smiled. None of the scripts they give you in movies prepared me for how ordinary it looked. There was no chorus, no crash. The air thickened and I was the only one choking on it. The grocery bag tore. The eggs survived like a cruel joke. Ryan mumbled something and left with the posture of a man who wants to be a shadow. She watched him go, then crossed her arms the way you cross them when your order's late. "We need to talk," she said, and I noticed her lipstick was smudged in a way a napkin could fix. We sat at the table where we had colored with the kids and sorted holiday cards and paid bills. She started with, "I didn't mean for it to happen," which might be the most perfectly meaningless thing a person can say. She talked about loneliness, about feeling unseen, about how motherhood had turned her into a function. She told me I had changed after Jack was born. Sterner, distracted, tired in a way that never shook itself off. I kept my voice quiet because if I didn't it would break, and if it broke I would say things that would live forever. I asked how long. "A few weeks," she said. My body knew she was lying before my head let me hear it. I slept in my car that night with the seat cranked back and a jacket wadded under my head. The sky was a soft, bored gray. A sprinkler ticked 3 houses down. It is a strange thing to cry with your mouth closed. The next morning I installed an AirTag under the lining of her trunk. I could dress it up as prudence or say I needed proof for a lawyer, and both would be true. The truer truth is that I needed to be certain I wasn't crazy. Certainty is a cruel kind of kindness. It cuts clean, but it still cuts. The gym detoured to a motel with a number masquerading as a name, a place 2 towns over that rented rooms by the hour and optimism by the minute. She parked around back, the way you park when you're both ashamed and efficient. I followed once, engine off, hands sweating on the steering wheel like a teenager waiting for curfew to end. Ryan came out first, hair damp, shirt wrong. He lit a cigarette and looked at nothing. She came out later with the satisfied looseness of someone who had taken off a heavy backpack, and I hated myself for recognizing the posture. She never saw me. That week I became a record keeper. Screenshots, dates, routes, the exact time a gray dot moved across my phone. I told nobody except a friend who listened the way a man watches another man carry the heavy end of a couch. I went to a therapist who told me trust can be rebuilt, and I nodded because it was easier than arguing with a framed certificate. At night I lay on the couch and stared at the ceiling and tried to outbreathe the panic, which is like trying to outswim the tide with your shoes on. She treated normal like a game of pretend that we both had agreed to play. Lunches packed, laundry folded, a new brand of detergent that smelled like a meadow. She asked what I wanted to watch. I said I was tired. One night she reached for me in bed and my whole nervous system flinched like someone had dropped a glass. I apologized. She cried. I stared at the closet door where her dresses hung like patient witnesses. Eventually I told my parents because you need to say some things out loud in wide rooms. My mom wept a leaking, quiet kind of cry and made soup. My dad's jaw squared itself and he said, "What do you need?" And I loved them both for thinking there were answers. I told 2 friends, both of whom said some version of "come over," and then let me sit on their couches with a drink and words that arrived out of order. We tried to talk because you feel like you have to perform maturity for the children, for the neighbors, for a judge you haven't met yet. She told me she had ended it with Ryan. A message pinged on her phone 3 hours later with his name at the top. She said she needed time to figure herself out, like she was a Rubik's Cube and had finally noticed the colors were scrambled. I asked if she wanted to stay married. She said she didn't know. Then she said yes. Then she said she wanted to work on us. I noticed that us sounded like a word you test drive. The kids knew before anyone told them because kids live at a frequency adults forget how to tune into. Ella asked why I slept on the couch. Jack kept bringing me dinosaurs and leaving them at the edge of the cushions like offerings. I started making little rituals. Waffles on Wednesdays, a joke in their lunchbox on Fridays, a song on the way to school that we all pretended to hate and sang anyway. I stacked normal moments the way you stack bricks, hoping a wall would feel like a house from the inside. 2 weeks after the kitchen, I told her I wanted to separate. I said it plain, like a man reading a measurement in a hardware aisle. She went very still, then nodded in the way people nod when there's a train they can't stop and they're choosing to sit. "I'll stay at my sister's," she said. She packed that evening. I carried a box to the car and set it in the trunk next to my secret, traitorous AirTag and felt like a bad actor in a mediocre play. The kids clung to her waist. I said Mommy needs a little time to rest and think. It was the kindest lie I had in me. The first night without her, the house felt unfamiliar in the same way your voice sounds weird on a recording. I opened the bourbon I had been saving for an occasion that wasn't this and took 3 sips, which is the number of sips you take when you want to feel warmer and end up feeling more alone. The dog, Scout, because of course we named the dog after a character we wanted our kids to grow up admiring, slept with his head on my foot like it was his job. I watched a baseball game with the sound off and forgot who was winning. Separation is paperwork and logistics and an ache you carry like a backpack you can't set down because every time you bend your knees the straps bite. We texted about pickups and doctor's appointments and library books. We spoke in driveways in the half-smiles parents give each other in front of children. We figured out weekends and birthdays and who gets Halloween this year, which is an absurd thing to calendar when you remember taking your daughter trick-or-treating in a princess dress and she kept tripping on the hem because she refused to hold it up. I found a lawyer who looked like he had invented the word retainer. He told me I was doing fine and then slid a stack of forms across his desk like a dealer with a calm face. I cleaned the house and then cleaned it again. I moved the couch because I couldn't stand seeing it from the angle where I had said the words, "I want to separate." I took down the measuring chart where we had marked the kids' heights in pencil on the hallway wall and copied the notches onto a piece of paper and then painted over them because looking at the ghosts of growth made me dizzy. I made a box of her things and taped it shut and wrote her name on it and then sat on the floor with the marker uncapped and cried in the quietest way a person can cry. There were good hours, and then there were hours that felt like wading through molasses. In the good hours, I took the kids to the park and watched Jack become a superhero on the jungle gym. I helped Ella with her math and remembered that 4th grade fractions are a trick the universe plays on parents. I cooked a meal I didn't ruin. In the other hours, I scrolled through old photos and cataloged 1,000 tiny ways I had been loved and chosen and then not. When the divorce moved from concept to calendar, it was as anticlimactic as people say. A hallway, a door, signatures, a clerk with an efficient stamp. She wore a gray sweater I had bought her one Christmas and I pretended not to notice. We stood by the elevator and looked at the floor. She said, "I'm sorry," in a voice that sounded like echo. I said, "I know." Because I did and also because I didn't know what else to say. The elevator arrived with a polite chime. She stepped inside. I watched the doors meet and make a mirror out of me. There is an after. People don't tell you that because you might rush toward it before you're ready. It doesn't announce itself with a trumpet or a sunrise. It sneaks in like fresh air under a door you forgot you'd cracked. The house got lighter. I rearranged the living room, bought a rug that didn't match anything and then rearranged again until it did. I found a rhythm with the kids. We made Friday nights ours. Grocery store pizza, a movie, the 3 of us under a blanket with the dog, the living room glowing that movie blue that makes everyone look softer. Ella drew 2 houses and gave them both front porches with flowers. Jack stopped asking if Mommy was coming home and started asking if we could get a lizard. I said absolutely not and then Googled lizard starter kits at midnight like a man with an identity crisis. I went back to therapy but to a different therapist, a woman who asked questions that felt like picking locks. She didn't tell me to rebuild trust. She asked why I believed my worth was a project. She said betrayal steals your reflection first, and I wrote that down and stuck it on the fridge and read it every morning next to the school lunch schedule. She gave me homework. Write a letter to the version of myself who stayed too long. I wrote 3 drafts and none of them were mean enough or kind enough and she said that sounded about right. Somewhere in there, I started going to a gym that smelled like rubber and hope. I didn't go to replace anything. I went because making a bar move up and down in a straight line felt like a promise my body could keep. I ran until my brain got too bored to be anxious. I did push-ups badly and then slightly less badly. A guy with a beard taught me how to deadlift without breaking myself and told me all problems are fractions if you think about sets and reps, and I didn't know if that was wisdom or pre-workout talking, but it helped. I also started writing. Not just the log of evidence I had kept in those first nauseous weeks, but stories, fragments. The inside of my head turned into paragraphs. I posted one anonymously on a forum where strangers tell the truth because they have nothing to lose. The comments poured in like weather, stormy, kind, blunt. People told me about their own kitchen moments, their motel parking lots, their courtroom stamps. I cried for strangers and felt less alone. You will survive this. someone wrote. It will feel like you won't, and then one day you will realize you already are. I screenshotted it and saved it in a folder labeled Keep. I met Rachel in a bookstore that believes in tall shelves and squeaky wooden floors. It was raining in that pretty way rain has when you're inside. We reached for the same beat-up Steinbeck like we were reenacting a meet-cute written by a writer who needed rent money. We laughed and then apologized, and then she said, "You take it, I've read it twice." And I said, "You take it, I've pretended to." And we stood there smiling in a way that made the person behind the register look up. We got coffee across the street because it felt rude not to. She had a dog named Maggie who was half something and half something else and completely convinced she knew English. She loved paperbacks and hated small talk and had a scar on her wrist from learning to cook badly like all of us. I told her too much too soon because I didn't have the energy to be mysterious. She listened without flinching, which is my new definition of grace. Here is something people don't tell you about healing. You do not move forward in a line. You circle. You spiral. You double back for a sock you forgot and find a memory stuck to it. I laughed with Rachel and then drove home and cried because my nervous system only knows two settings. Too much and not enough. She never asked me to hurry. She never asked me to forgive on a schedule. She texted me pictures of her dog looking judgmental and said things like, "Want to go see a bad movie and pretend it's avant-garde?" And I felt my life expand by inches. Amanda still exists in my periphery, as all exes do when you share little humans and a history and a zip code. We learned how to hand the kids off without handing each other more hurt. Sometimes I catch her looking at me with a look I can't translate. Once, after dropping Jack off, she stood on the porch like a person who forgot what they came to say. "I didn't just betray you," she said, eyes on the welcome mat. "I betrayed myself." The line hung between us like a bridge you don't trust. "I know," I said, "and I did, in the complicated way you know the shape of a coastline you no longer live near." She nodded and left. It wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't even an apology in the traditional sense. It was a truth she needed to set down where someone could see it. There were dreams. The brain is an unkind screenwriter. I dreamed I was in our kitchen again, and she kissed him again and again and again while looking at me, and the eggs broke this time and kept breaking without ever emptying. I woke up with my heart sprinting. There were also mornings I woke up quiet, made pancakes shaped like lopsided Mickeys, and we ate at the counter and Jack told me a joke so bad it looped back to genius. Grief and joy took turns. Sometimes they shared the stage. Even now, if I close my eyes, I can see the smile in the kitchen and it tugs at me like a hook. It will probably always live somewhere in me. But it no longer owns the house. It rents a small room and pays late. The larger rooms are filled with other things. Ella's piano practice, which alternates between a song I can almost place and something that sounds like a cat walking across the keys. Jack's soccer cleats thudding in the dryer because I forgot to take them out. Maggie sprawled on the rug like she understands every word to the movie and is bored anyway. Rachel's hand finding mine on the couch during a scene that would make other people roll their eyes. My own laugh surprising me like a guest who shows up early and brought the good chips. If you're looking for a moral, I don't trust stories that come with instructions. I have some truths instead, the kind you only earn by living long enough to hate earning them. Love is not a promise. It is a practice. If you stop showing up for it, it will stop showing up for you. Betrayal can be both a choice and a symptom. It is possible to be a good mother and a bad partner, a kind person who does a cruel thing. None of this absolves. It just complicates the black and white into something that looks like real life. Forgiveness is not clearance to return to the scene of the harm. Sometimes forgiveness is the decision to stop letting the harm set your clocks. Trust does not regrow where you plant it. It regrows where you water it, and sometimes that is in a different field. I used to replay the scene in the kitchen and try to edit my own lines. I would give myself a speech, an ultimatum, an exit that looked brave instead of confused. But we never get the tidy version. We get the version where our hands shake and our mouths forget words and we buy the wrong eggs. And we survive anyway, not because we're heroes, but because forward is a habit ourselves learned long before we learned language. One day I realized I had gone an entire afternoon without thinking about the affair. The next week it was 2 days. The first time I laughed so hard I had to lean on the counter. I felt like someone had returned something that had been stolen and left it on the porch without a note. I do not wish her ill. That surprises people when I say it, like anger is the only honor guard for pain. I wish her the work she needs to do and the peace on the other side of it. I wish for our children to grow up in two houses that are both homes, not one home and one reheated argument. I wish for my own heart the kind of softness that doesn't make me a doormat. I wish for all of us the wisdom to ask for what we need before we go looking for it where it cannot be given. Sometimes Rachel and I walk by the river after dinner. The water there moves like a person late for a train. She squeezes my hand and asks what I'm thinking, and I say nothing, which we both know is shorthand for too much to fit in a sentence. Once she asked me what I learned from all of it. I said, that I am not the worst thing that happened to me, that grief is love's shadow, that I can build a life out of ordinary, honest days and it will be enough. She said, it already is, and I believed her in the way you believe your own name. If you are reading this because you are in your own kitchen right now, staring at a version of the moment that took my breath, I don't have a map. I have this, you will breathe again. Not because you decide to, but because your body is very stubborn about air. You will sleep real sleep again. You will trust someone with a small thing and then a bigger thing, and then realize you did it without rehearsing. You will tell the story less often and then not at all, not because you are hiding it, but because it has settled in you like a scar you forget is there until the weather changes. One day you will stand at your own counter with music on and a mess of vegetables and the smell of garlic in your hands, and you will realize you have gone an hour without wanting the before back. You will be simply in the after, and it will not be empty. It will be yours. And if the image still arrives, as mine sometimes does, her smile over his shoulder, that small, ordinary betrayal, I do not fight it. I nod at it the way you nod at a neighbor from a distance. I let it pass. I turn back to the stove, to the dog nosing my shin, to the sound of a kid practicing scales in the next room, to the text from Rachel that says, get anything at the store that looks like it wants to be dinner, to the life I am practicing, the one that keeps showing up, patient and unshowy, asking only that I meet it where it is.